Most people don't get destroyed by the hardships they face. They get destroyed because their mind collapses under pressure, turning manageable difficulties into catastrophic breakdowns. They never learn that mental power is a skill you build deliberately, not a trait you're born with. In this video, I'll reveal Machiavelli's cold laws of mental power that show you how to forge a mind so resilient that when life breaks you down, you rebuild yourself stronger, colder, and completely unbreakable. Now, imagine this. Someone faces a significant setback. A relationship ends. A business fails. A dream dies. They feel the pain, which is natural. But instead of processing it and moving forward, their mind spirals. They replay the failure obsessively. They catastrophize the future. They collapse into helplessness. Weeks become months. Months become years. The setback becomes their identity. One day, staring at the wreckage of wasted time, they ask themselves, "Why can't I recover from anything?" Here's the truth. Their mind was never trained for adversity. While they developed skills for success, comfort, and good times, they never developed the mental architecture required to withstand collapse. By the end of this video, you'll understand the brutal psychological principles that separate people who break and never recover from people who break and rebuild stronger. You'll see why certain individuals emerge from catastrophe with terrifying strength while others are destroyed by inconvenience. And you'll learn the cold, merciless truths Machiavelli understood about forging mental power that makes you essentially unbreakable. Before we start, type this in the comments to lock it in: my mind is unbreakable and I control my response to everything. Most people never develop real mental strength, not because they haven't suffered enough, but because they've been psychologically conditioned to believe that emotional pain is something to avoid at all costs rather than something to master. From childhood, we're taught a dangerous lie. That we should always feel good. That discomfort is bad. That emotional pain means something is wrong. That we deserve to feel happy and comfortable at all times. That suffering is an aberration that needs to be eliminated immediately through comfort, distraction, or medication. These messages create minds that are completely unprepared for reality. Because reality doesn't care about your emotional comfort. Life will hurt you. People will betray you. Plans will fail. Loss will come. Death will arrive. And if your entire psychological framework is built on the assumption that you should always feel good, you'll be completely destroyed the moment reality delivers its inevitable pain. But examine who actually survives and thrives through catastrophe. The ones who believed life should be comfortable, who thought they deserved constant happiness, who assumed emotional pain was a sign something had gone terribly wrong. Where are they after the first real crisis? Broken. Still processing trauma from years ago. Still unable to function because something hurt them and their mind never learned to process pain and continue operating. Still waiting to feel better before they can move forward with their life. Machiavelli saw what soft cultures refuse to accept. Mental strength isn't natural. It's forged. The mind is like any other system. If you never stress it, never challenge it, never force it to operate under duress, it remains weak. And weak minds shatter under pressure that strong minds barely notice. When you believe you should always feel good, you train your mind to be fragile. When you avoid all discomfort, you guarantee that unavoidable discomfort will destroy you. When you treat emotional pain as an emergency, you create a mind that declares emergency constantly. This is why people raised in comfort often possess the most fragile psychology. Not because they're inherently weak, but because they've never trained for adversity. The system isn't broken. It simply operates on laws of adaptation. Organisms adapt to their environment. Minds adapt to their demands. If your environment demands nothing of your mental strength, you develop none. If your environment constantly tests your psychological resilience, you develop it. Smart people understand these forces and deliberately train their minds for adversity before adversity arrives. The naive wait for a crisis to reveal their mental weakness. The prepared build mental strength systematically so crisis finds them ready. Machiavelli's laws aren't about becoming emotionless or robotic. They're about becoming psychologically invincible. He showed that if you depend on feeling good to function well, you will be defeated constantly by life's inevitable difficulties. Your relationships will be fragile. Your career will be unstable. Your mental health will be hostage to circumstances. Not because you're defective, but because you've never trained your mind for reality. The moment you accept that mental strength is built through deliberate psychological conditioning, you stop hoping life will be gentle and start preparing your mind for life as it actually is. That's when nothing can break you because you've trained your mind to function regardless of how you feel. Law 1. Accept that suffering is information, not punishment. Most people interpret pain completely wrong. When something hurts, they immediately assume something has gone terribly wrong. They see suffering as evidence of failure, bad luck, or cosmic injustice. This interpretation makes pain unbearable because it feels meaningless and unfair. Machiavelli understood that suffering is neutral information about what isn't working. Pain is feedback. Discomfort is data. When you interpret suffering as information rather than punishment, you can extract value from it instead of being destroyed by it. You experience a painful breakup. Most people spiral into victimhood. Why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? They're interpreting the pain as punishment, which makes them powerless. You, however, can interpret the same pain as information. What does this reveal about my judgment, my boundaries, my patterns? Suddenly the pain has purpose. It's showing you something you need to see. Same suffering, completely different mental response. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending pain doesn't hurt. It hurts. But how you interpret what the pain means determines whether it breaks you or builds you. When suffering is punishment, you're a victim. When suffering is information, you're a student. Machiavelli observed that the wise extract lessons from adversity while fools only feel the pain. Every difficulty carries information about reality, about your weaknesses, about what needs to change. If you're only experiencing the pain without receiving the information, you're suffering pointlessly. Look at who breaks versus who builds from the same difficulties. Two people lost their jobs. One interprets it as punishment, evidence they're worthless, proof life is unfair. They collapse mentally. The other interprets it as information about industry changes, skill gaps, or toxic work environments. They adapt and move forward. Same event, opposite outcomes based purely on interpretation. The self-pitying interpret all suffering as punishment and become perpetual victims, mentally broken by difficulties that others use as stepping stones. The cold denies all emotional pain and misses the information suffering provides, repeating the same mistakes because they won't acknowledge the feedback. Mentally powerful people feel the pain fully while interpreting it as information. They ask what the suffering is revealing. They extract the lesson. They adapt based on feedback. They don't enjoy pain, but they use it ruthlessly for growth. When you reframe suffering from punishment to information, you transform your relationship with adversity. Pain stops being something that breaks you and becomes something that teaches you. That reinterpretation makes you psychologically resilient because you're mining value from every difficulty instead of being destroyed by it. Drop this affirmation in the comments: my pain carries information and I extract every lesson. Law 2. Separate what you feel from what you do. In the architecture of mental strength, most people are completely controlled by their emotions. They feel sad and become inactive. They feel anxious and avoid challenges. They feel angry and act destructively. There's no gap between feeling and action. Emotion immediately dictates behavior. Machiavelli knew that the mentally weak are slaves to their feelings while the mentally strong create space between emotion and action. You can feel terrible and still function excellently. You can feel afraid and still act courageously. You can feel devastated and still handle responsibilities. You wake up feeling absolutely horrible. Depressed, anxious, unmotivated. Most people let that feeling determine their entire day. They stay in bed. They cancel commitments. They accomplish nothing because they feel bad. You, however, acknowledge the feeling without obeying it. I feel terrible. And I'm going to train anyway. I'm going to work anyway. I'm going to handle my responsibilities anyway. The feeling doesn't control the action. This isn't suppression or denial. It's sovereignty. When emotions dictate behavior, you're not in control. Your biochemistry is in control. Your circumstances are in control. Anything that affects your mood controls your entire life. That's psychological slavery. Machiavelli taught that those who can only act when they feel good accomplish nothing because feeling good is unreliable. The powerful develop the capacity to function regardless of emotional state. They perform when motivated and when unmotivated. When confident and when terrified. When happy and when devastated. Watch who actually achieves consistently. The person who shows up to work excellently regardless of personal emotional state. The parent who handles responsibilities calmly despite internal chaos. The professional who performs under pressure while feeling anxious. They haven't eliminated emotions. They've separated emotion from action. The emotion-controlled wait to feel right before doing anything, accomplishing almost nothing because feelings are constantly shifting. The emotion deniers try to eliminate all feelings and become psychologically damaged from suppression. Mentally powerful people feel everything fully while maintaining behavioral control. They acknowledge emotions without obeying them. They feel fear and act anyway. They feel sadness and function anyway. They feel anger and respond strategically anyway. They've built the gap between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl identified as the source of human freedom. When you separate what you feel from what you do, you become psychologically unconquerable because your functionality is no longer hostage to your emotional state. That separation makes you unstoppable because bad feelings can't stop good actions. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I feel everything but my actions remain under my control. Law 3. Build mental strength through voluntary hardship. Most people only experience difficulty when life forces it on them. They avoid all voluntary discomfort, seeking the easiest path, the most comfortable option, the least resistant route. Then when unavoidable hardship arrives, their mind has no reference point for enduring difficulty. Machiavelli understood that the mind trained only in comfort shatters under stress. But the mind deliberately exposed to voluntary hardship develops resilience that makes forced hardship manageable. You must choose difficulty before difficulty chooses you. You've never voluntarily done anything hard. Never fasted when you could eat. Never train when you are tired. Never stay disciplined when you don't have to. Your life has been pure comfort optimization. Then the crisis arrives. Suddenly you must endure difficulty. But your mind has no capacity for it because you've never trained that capacity. You break immediately. Compare that to someone who regularly does hard things voluntarily. Cold showers. Difficult workouts. Extended fasts. Challenging projects. When forced hardship arrives, their mind recognizes the sensation. It's been here before. It knows it can endure. This isn't about suffering for suffering's sake. It's about psychological inoculation. When you regularly choose difficulty, you train your mind's capacity to handle difficulty. You build tolerance for discomfort. You prove to yourself repeatedly that you can endure what's unpleasant. Machiavelli observed that soldiers trained in harsh conditions fight better than soldiers raised in luxury. The same applies psychologically. Minds trained through voluntary challenge handle involuntary challenge better than minds trained only in comfort. Look at who breaks versus who persists. When the economy crashes, illness arrives, relationships end. The comfort-addicted collapse because their mind has no reference for enduring difficulty. The deliberately challenged remain functional because their mind has been trained for adversity. The comfort-seeking avoids all unnecessary difficulty, developing minds so fragile that minor inconvenience feels catastrophic. The punishment-addicted seek suffering compulsively, confusing self-destruction with strength. Mentally powerful people strategically choose difficulty. They fast occasionally to train hunger tolerance. They do cold exposure to train discomfort tolerance. They take on challenging projects to train frustration tolerance. They deliberately place themselves in uncomfortable situations to expand their psychological capacity. They're building mental strength the same way athletes build physical strength, through progressive overload. When you regularly choose hardship, forced hardship finds you prepared instead of destroyed. That voluntary training makes you psychologically bulletproof because your mind has developed capacity that soft minds never build. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I choose difficulty to build the strength that crisis requires. Law 4. Control the narrative you tell yourself. In the mechanics of mental power, most people are completely controlled by the stories they tell themselves about what's happening. They experience a setback and immediately construct a narrative of permanent defeat. They face rejection and narrate it as proof of worthlessness. They encounter difficulty and tell themselves it means they should give up. Machiavelli knew that reality is neutral, but interpretation determines psychological impact. The story you tell yourself about what's happening is more powerful than what's actually happening. Control the narrative or the narrative controls you. You fail at something important. The default narrative most people tell: I'm a failure. This proves I don't have what it takes. I should quit. This narrative destroys motivation, creates helplessness, and guarantees surrender. You can tell a different story about the identical event. This is one setback. It reveals what I need to improve. Every successful person has failed repeatedly. This is part of the process. Same event, opposite psychological impact based purely on narrative. This isn't delusion or denial. It's a strategic interpretation. You're choosing the story that serves your resilience and forward motion rather than defaulting to the story that destroys you. When you control the narrative, you control whether events strengthen or break you. Machiavelli taught that how events are interpreted matters more than the events themselves. The general who narrates a retreat as strategic regrouping maintains morale. The general who narrates the same retreat as shameful defeat destroys it. Reality is identical. Impact is opposite. Watch how narrative determines outcomes. Two people face the same diagnosis. One narrates it as a death sentence and gives up mentally. The other narrates it as a fight worth fighting and mobilizes every resource. Outcomes diverge dramatically based on the story each tells themselves about what the diagnosis means. The passive accept whatever narrative their mind generates automatically, becoming victims of their own catastrophizing thoughts. The delusional tell themselves obvious lies and lose touch with reality, creating unsustainable narratives that collapse. Mentally powerful people consciously choose their narrative. They acknowledge reality clearly while interpreting it in ways that maintain psychological functionality. They don't deny difficulty, but they refuse to narrate it as permanent defeat. They tell themselves stories of challenge, learning, and eventual triumph rather than stories of victimhood, helplessness, and guaranteed failure. When you control your narrative, you transform how every event affects you psychologically. That narrative control makes you mentally invincible because you're authoring your own psychological response rather than being controlled by automatic catastrophic thinking. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I choose the story, and the story I choose makes me stronger. Law 5. Use pain to eliminate weakness. Most people try to return to who they were before the pain. They experience trauma and spend years trying to recover their old self, hoping to get back to normal. They want the pain to erase and leave them unchanged. This is psychological waste. Machiavelli understood that pain should be used to destroy your weak parts and rebuild stronger ones. You should emerge from suffering as a different person, not the same person restored. The goal isn't recovery, it's evolution through destruction. You go through something devastating. A betrayal. A loss. A collapse of some kind. Most people's goal is to get back to normal, to feel like they did before it happened. They're trying to restore who they were. But who you were had the weakness that allowed the pain to happen. Why would you want to restore that? Instead, use the pain to burn away naivety, weakness, and vulnerability. Let it destroy the parts of you that needed to die. Emerge as someone harder, wiser, and far more difficult to hurt. This isn't about becoming bitter or closed. It's about using catastrophe as a forge. The old you dies. The new you is built from the ashes. Stronger precisely because you've been broken and reconstructed. Machiavelli observed that crisis reveals weakness, and the wise use that revelation to eliminate those weaknesses permanently. The foolish just want the crisis to end so they can return to their previous fragility. Look at who grows versus who stays stuck. Two people experience betrayal. One spends years trying to trust like they used to, hoping to recover their old openness. They're trying to restore who they were. The other lets the betrayal kill their naivety, builds better judgment, develops stronger boundaries. They've used the pain to become someone who can't be betrayed the same way again. They're not recovered, they're transformed. The recoverer focused tried to return to who they were and keep the same vulnerabilities that allowed the pain to happen. The bitterness lets pain destroy them randomly, becoming damaged rather than refined. Mentally powerful people use pain surgically. They identify which parts of themselves the suffering is exposed as weak. They deliberately eliminate those weaknesses. They rebuild themselves differently, stronger, with the vulnerabilities removed. They don't recover, they evolve. When you use pain to eliminate weakness rather than just endure pain and hope to forget it, you transform suffering into strategic self-reconstruction. That transformational approach makes you increasingly unbreakable because each suffering makes you stronger rather than just leaving scars. Drop this affirmation in the comments: pain reveals my weakness and I eliminate it permanently. Law 6. Never let crisis reveal your breaking point. In the hierarchy of mental power, most people reveal exactly how much pressure they can handle before they break. They have a threshold where they stop functioning, start panicking, or completely collapse. Everyone around them learns precisely how much stress they can bear before they become useless. Machiavelli knew that once people know your breaking point, they can push you to it whenever convenient. The mentally powerful never reveal their maximum capacity for pressure. They function under immense stress while appearing calm, so nobody knows where their actual limit is. You're under enormous pressure. Professionally, personally, financially, all simultaneously. Most people make their stress visible. They complain constantly. They show panic. They broadcast their overwhelm. Everyone now knows they're near breaking. They've revealed their threshold. You, however, handle the same pressure while maintaining composure. You process the stress internally. You solve problems calmly. You don't broadcast your limit. People assume you have far more capacity than you're currently using because they never see you break. This isn't about pretending nothing bothers you. It's about understanding that revealing your maximum stress tolerance gives others power over you. They learn exactly how much they can demand before you break. They discover your limit and push right up to it. Machiavelli taught that appearing stronger than you are is as valuable as being strong. When people don't know your breaking point, they treat you more carefully. When they know exactly how much pressure breaks you, they'll apply that pressure. What's the difference? Who gets overwhelmed with more and more responsibility? The person who shows strain under current load. People learn they're near capacity and keep loading more until they break. Who maintains control of their workload? The person who handles pressure calmly, never revealing how much is actually weighing on them. People don't know their limit, so they don't test it. The stress broadcasters reveal their breaking point constantly, training everyone around them to recognize when they're overwhelmed and vulnerable. The stoic pretenders claim nothing bothers them, then suddenly collapse because they've denied all stress instead of processing it. Mentally powerful people feel pressure fully while maintaining external composure. They process stress privately. They solve problems without broadcasting panic. They handle difficulties while appearing to have capacity remaining. They never reveal their actual maximum tolerance, so nobody knows how much they can truly bear. When you never reveal your breaking point, you maintain psychological advantage because nobody knows how much pressure you can actually handle before you break. That hidden capacity makes you formidable because people can't accurately gauge your limits. Drop this affirmation in the comments: my limits remain hidden and my composure reveals nothing. Law 7. Turn every collapse into strategic reconstruction. Most people experience collapse and see it purely as loss. Everything fell apart. They failed. They're broken. They focus entirely on what was destroyed without recognizing the strategic opportunity collapse creates. Machiavelli understood that collapse clears ground for rebuilding better. When everything falls apart, you're free to reconstruct without being bound by previous structures. The strategically minded don't just survive collapse, they use it to build something stronger than what existed before. Your business fails. Your relationship ends. Your health collapses. Whatever structure you'd built is gone. Most people see only loss and spend years mourning what died. You can see opportunities. The old structure had flaws that led to collapse. Now you can rebuild without those flaws. You're starting fresh with hard-earned wisdom. You can construct something far superior because you're not constrained by preserving any part of what failed. This isn't toxic positivity. Collapse is genuinely painful. But after the pain, there's construction. And construction after collapse can be far more intelligent than building on weak foundations that were destined to fail eventually anyway. Machiavelli observed that sometimes fortune destroys what we built to force us to build better. The attached mourn forever. The strategic rebuild is stronger. Look at who emerges stronger after catastrophe. The entrepreneur whose first business failed, who used that failure to understand what doesn't work, who built the next venture with wisdom only failure teaches. The person whose toxic relationship ended, who used that ending to develop better judgment and build healthier love. They didn't just recover from collapse, they used collapse as an opportunity for superior reconstruction. The grief-stuck mourn what died forever, unable to build again because they're emotionally attached to what failed. The reckless rebuild the same flawed structure immediately, learning nothing from collapse. Mentally powerful people grieve fully, then reconstruct strategically. They feel the loss. They honor what ended. Then they analyze why the collapse happened. They extract every lesson. They identify the flaws in what failed. They design the reconstruction to eliminate those flaws. They build version 2.0 with everything version 1.0 taught them. When you turn collapse into strategic reconstruction, you transform catastrophic loss into forced evolution. That reconstructive mindset makes you essentially unkillable because every time life knocks you down, you rebuild stronger than you were before. Drop this affirmation in the comments: when I fall apart, I rebuild myself better than before. Law 8. Make your mind ungovernable by external force. In the final law of mental power, Machiavelli reveals that true psychological strength is sovereignty. Most people's minds are completely governed by external circumstances. Good things happen and they feel good. Bad things happen and they feel bad. Other people approve and they feel confident. Other people criticize and they feel worthless. Their internal state is entirely controlled by external forces. Machiavelli knew that the person whose mind is governed by external circumstances is a puppet. Real mental power means your psychological state is determined by your own principles and decisions, not by whatever is happening around you. The market crashes and everyone panics, so you panic. Your partner is upset, so you're upset. Someone insults you, so you're angry. You've given complete control of your internal state to external forces. You're not governing your mind, circumstances are governing it. Compare that to someone whose internal state remains stable regardless of external chaos. The market crashes, but they remain calm because they've prepared. Someone insults them, but they're unaffected because they don't outsource self-worth to others' opinions. They govern their own mind rather than letting external forces govern it. This isn't about being unaffected by reality. It's about understanding that while you can't control what happens, you absolutely control your response to what happens. When your mind is governed by external force, you're powerless. When you govern your own mind, you're powerful regardless of circumstances. Machiavelli taught that the ruler controlled by fortune is destroyed when fortune changes. But the ruler who maintains internal control regardless of external circumstances survives all changes. Your mind must be your own territory, governed by your laws, not by external forces. Watch who breaks and who remains stable. Crisis comes. Some people's minds immediately collapse into chaos because their psychological state was entirely dependent on external stability. Others remain internally stable because their mind is governed by internal principles, not external circumstances. Same external situation, completely different internal experience based purely on who governs the mind. The externally governed give complete control of their psychological state to circumstances, becoming unstable whenever circumstances change. The rigidly controlled try to eliminate all emotional responses and become psychologically damaged. Mentally powerful people feel everything while maintaining internal governance. They acknowledge external circumstances while refusing to let those circumstances dictate their internal state. They respond to reality without being controlled by it. They maintain psychological sovereignty regardless of what's happening around them. When your mind becomes ungovernable by external force, you achieve true psychological power because nothing outside you can control what happens inside you. That sovereignty makes you unbreakable because your stability comes from within, not from without. Drop this affirmation in the comments: my mind is my territory and I govern it absolutely. Now you know Machiavelli's cold laws of mental power. How interpreting suffering as information rather than punishment extracts value from every difficulty. How separating what you feel from what you do prevents emotions from controlling your behavior. How building mental strength through voluntary hardship prepares you for forced hardship. How controlling the narrative you tell yourself determines whether events strengthen or break you. How using pain to eliminate weakness transforms suffering into evolution. How never revealing your breaking point maintains strategic advantage. How turning collapse into reconstruction makes catastrophe into opportunity. And how making your mind ungovernable by external force achieves true psychological sovereignty. But none of this matters if it stays as an interesting philosophy you appreciate but never implement. The question isn't whether these principles work, they've created every psychological warrior in history. The question is whether you'll stay mentally fragile, or become mentally unbreakable? Will you keep interpreting pain as punishment or finally see it as information that makes you wiser? Will you keep letting feelings dictate actions or separate emotion from behavior? Will you keep avoiding all difficulties or train your mind through voluntary hardship? Will you keep accepting catastrophic narratives or control the story you tell yourself? Will you keep trying to recover who you were or use pain to eliminate weakness and become someone stronger? Will you keep revealing your breaking point or maintain composure that hides your limits? Will you keep mourning what collapsed or use destruction as an opportunity for superior reconstruction? And will you keep letting external circumstances govern your internal state? Or finally achieve psychological sovereignty where you govern your own mind regardless of what happens around you? Nothing can break you once your mind becomes stronger than anything that tries to break it. If this revealed how to forge unbreakable mental power, hit the like button. Subscribe for more content on dark psychology and mental resilience. And share this video with someone who needs to stop breaking and start becoming psychologically invincible. Your transformation doesn't start when you understand these laws. It starts when you forge your mind with them. Drop this final affirmation in the comments: my mind is trained, sovereign, and completely unbreakable.